October 5th, 1935. Supermarine Works, Southampton, England. Rain hammered against the tin roof of the design hangar, turning the air into a steady rhythm of metallic drumming. Beneath a single hanging lamp, a man sat hunched over a drafting table, his pencil tracing gentle, sweeping arcs across parchment. His name was Beverly Shenstone. 29 years old, Canadian-born, and one of Britain's most gifted aerodynamicists. Around him, the smell of glue, oil, and wet paper filled the air. Engineers at Supermarine Aviation Works, under the direction of Reginald J. Mitchell, were struggling to build a new fighter for the Royal Air Force. One fast enough to meet the storm they all sensed was coming. But that morning, tension filled the workshop. Mitchell's new prototype, known only by its development name, Type 300, wasn't performing as hoped. The RAF wanted 300 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. The numbers didn't add up. The wings, straight and blunt-edged, created too much drag. Mitchell paced behind Shenstone, chain-smoking in silence. "The Air Ministry wants magic," he said finally. "They don't understand what they're asking for. The airflow breaks here at the root. We can't get her clean enough." Shenstone didn't look up. His pencil kept moving, each line more deliberate than the last. "It's not the engine," he murmured. "It's the air. We're forcing it instead of flowing with it." He paused, lifted the pencil, and began to draw again. Two long, curved lines that met in a sharp taper at the tip. Then he shaded the edges, adding subtle, graceful contours that arched just so. Mitchell frowned. "What's that supposed to be?" Shenstone looked up. "A new wing," he said simply. "Not straight, not swept, elliptical." He turned the page toward Mitchell. The shape looked elegant, almost organic, more bird than machine. "See here," Shenstone continued, tapping the sketch. "An ellipse distributes lift evenly from root to tip. No dead zones, no drag at the edges. The air will flow clean across it, smooth, uninterrupted." Mitchell studied it, brow furrowed. "You're saying we shape the whole wing like a curve?" "Exactly. The Germans did something similar with the Heinkel H-70, but not this cleanly. We'll refine it. Thinner, sharper, balanced. It'll slice through the air." Mitchell's skepticism softened. He knew brilliance when he heard it. "You think it'll work?" Shenstone smiled faintly. "It has to." He picked up his pencil again, adding tiny cross-sections along the wing's outline, precise, hand-calculated arcs representing airflow, pressure, and lift distribution. Each mark carried the confidence of a man who could see the wind. That night, when the factory lights dimmed and the rain still pounded on the roof, Shenstone remained alone at his desk. His final pencil strokes curved across the page like a signature of destiny. The elliptical wing, born not from a machine, but from a single, perfect sketch. The wind beneath the wing, January 1936. Vickers Supermarine Aerodynamics Test Facility, Southampton. A bitter winter wind howled outside the hangar, but inside, a low mechanical whine filled the air. The new wing model, Shenstone's elliptical design, carved in balsa and coated with lacquer, sat inside the wind tunnel, its smooth surface glinting under the lamps. Beverly Shenstone stood beside the test rig, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on the pressure gauges. Beside him, Reginald Mitchell, pale and coughing into his handkerchief, leaned on a stool. The cancer that would soon take his life was already eating away at him. But his attention never wavered from the model. "Speed 50. Airflow steady," called the technician over the noise. "Recording lift and drag coefficients." As the air roared across the model, tufts of wool glued along the wing's surface fluttered, smooth, even, unbroken. No turbulence, no sudden eddies. Shenstone's pencil lines, born on a rainy night months before, were now holding their shape against the invisible hand of physics. Mitchell leaned forward, studying the gauges. Drag? Down by nearly 15% from the old Type 224. The technician shouted back. Lift distribution, perfect symmetry. Shenstone's heart pounded. 15%. That was everything. That was the difference between a mediocre interceptor and a world beater. He exhaled, watching the airflow trace itself along the elliptical outline like silk over glass. Mitchell smiled faintly. You've done it, Bev. You've actually done it. But Shenstone shook his head. Not yet. We still need strength without weight, a thin wing that won't twist in flight. That problem would take weeks to solve. He experimented with internal spars and ribs, distributing stress evenly along the curved frame, balancing stiffness and lightness with surgical precision. Each revision was redrawn by hand. No computers, no calculators, just his brain, a slide rule, and a pencil. At one point, Shenstone stayed awake for 48 hours straight, surrounded by stacks of graph paper and coffee cups. An engineer passing by muttered, "He's mad." Another replied, "Yes, but the good kind of mad." By spring, the final blueprints were complete. Mitchell ran his hand across the drawing board where Shenstone's masterpiece was pinned. The wing's geometry was pure elegance, every curve intentional, every inch a conversation between air and metal. "Beverly," Mitchell said softly, "when she flies, she'll be beautiful." The first prototype, K5000 was assembled that spring. Its wings unlike anything the RAF had ever seen, long, thin, and graceful. They curved outward like the arms of a falcon. Ground crews called it the Angel Wing. On March 5, 1936, under a pale Hampshire sky, test pilot Captain Joseph "Mutt" Summers climbed into the cockpit. Shenstone watched from the ground, notebook in hand, as the Merlin engine roared to life. The blue-gray aircraft gathered speed down the grass strip and lifted effortlessly into the air. At 10:37 a.m., the Spitfire flew for the first time. Those on the ground held their breath as it climbed and turned. Summers banked left, tight, clean, no stall, no wobble. The plane sliced through the sky with fluid grace, like a gull on the wind. When he landed, Summers climbed out and removed his goggles, grinning. "Don't touch a thing," he said. "Not a bloody thing." Shenstone didn't cheer. He just smiled quietly, pencil still in hand. He'd seen the airflow in his mind months before. And now it was real. The Spitfire's wings had taken flight. The wing meets the war. August 15th, 1940. Over the English Channel. The sky above Kent burned blue and silver, streaked with contrails and the echo of war. The Battle of Britain had entered its deadliest phase. From the cockpit of Spitfire McWinnen-3 Squadron leader Geoffrey Wellham tightened his harness, the Merlin engine snarling beneath him. He was 19 years old, barely more than a boy. But today, he was the thin line between Britain and invasion. "Tally-ho! Bandits, 11 o'clock high!" The radio crackled as a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109s swooped down from the sun. The Spitfires climbed to meet them, engines howling, wings glittering like blades. And it was those wings, Beverly Shenstone's wings, that made the difference. As Wellham pulled into a hard right turn, the Spitfire seemed to pivot around its own shadow. The elliptical wings sliced through the air with no stall, no drag, just perfect fluid control. The Germans, used to the sharper, heavier wings of their 109s, couldn't match the turn radius. "He's overshot," Wellham shouted, rolling inverted and diving behind his opponent. "Now," he fired. The 109 burst into flame and spiraled toward the channel below. Over the radio came laughter, cheers, relief. But the fight wasn't over. Another wave of German fighters appeared, and the sky dissolved into chaos, twisting trails, spinning machines, flashes of fire and metal. From the ground at Biggin Hill, mechanics craned their necks to watch the ballet of death unfolding miles above. One engineer, hands black with oil, pointed up at a Spitfire banking into a perfect climbing turn. "That wing," he said quietly, "that bloody wing is saving us." He was right. The Spitfire's elliptical planform didn't just make it beautiful. It made it deadly. The evenly distributed lift reduced drag to a minimum, giving the aircraft both speed and maneuverability. While the German 109 could dive faster, it couldn't dance. Shenstone's design allowed the Spitfire to climb higher, turn tighter, and recover faster. It was the kind of aerodynamic balance engineers spent their whole careers chasing, and he'd sketched it by hand 5 years earlier. That afternoon, after hours of dogfighting, Wellham and his squadron limped back to base, fuel gauges empty, wings riddled with holes but intact. As his Spitfire rolled to a stop, ground crews ran to meet him. "She held together," Wellham said, climbing down. "Even with half a wing missing, she still flew like a dream." Inside a modest design office, hundreds of miles away, Shenstone was bent over a drafting table again. Now in charge of refining new Spitfire variants for higher altitudes and heavier loads. When word came from Fighter Command about the aircraft's performance, he read the reports in silence. "Turns tighter than the 109, one pilot had written. "Feels alive in your hands." Whoever designed these wings knew what he was doing. Shenstone set the report down, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mitchell had passed away 4 years earlier, never seeing his creation in combat. The Spitfire had become his legacy. But the air that flowed so perfectly over its skin, the invisible grace that gave it life, that was Shenstone's. Outside, bombers droned overhead, and the air raid sirens began to wail. Britain was burning, but her defenders still flew, their wings glinting against the flames. On that day, and every day that followed, Shenstone's pencil sketch became the nation's salvation. A masterpiece of aerodynamics, forged not in metal, but in imagination. September 1940, RAF Duxford, Cambridgeshire. The airfield was alive with the hum of engines and the smell of scorched fuel. Mechanics swarmed around returning aircraft. Bullet-riddled Spitfires taxiing in, their wings peppered with holes, some so torn they seemed ready to collapse. Yet somehow, they held. Standing near a dispersal hut, Beverly Shenstone squinted into the sunlight as another squadron returned from patrol. The elegant curved wings he'd once sketched by lamplight now cut through the sky by the hundreds, the RAF's last shield against annihilation. Beside him, a weary pilot climbed down from his cockpit and removed his helmet. "Bloody near lost her this time," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Took cannon hits on the port wing. Thought she'd snap clean off." Shenstone stepped closer, inspecting the damage. The leading edge was shredded, the fabric scorched, but the wing's elliptical frame had absorbed the stress perfectly. "She brought you home," Shenstone said quietly. "Aye." The pilot grinned weakly. "She always does." It was a small exchange, but it said everything. In the design offices at Vickers Supermarine, the war had transformed the once peaceful drafting rooms into a battlefield of their own. Shenstone now oversaw the aerodynamic refinements for the Spitfire MKV and MK9, adapting the design to handle heavier engines, faster speeds, and even jet-age prototypes still on paper. The elliptical wing, however, remained untouched. Shenstone refused to alter its geometry. "We can change the guns, the fuel, the propeller," he told his colleagues, "but not the wing. You don't improve perfection. You preserve it." Reports from Fighter Command flooded in daily. Tales of dogfights over Dover, victories against the Luftwaffe, and Spitfires performing maneuvers no other aircraft could match. Pilots spoke of the Spitfire as if it were alive, responsive, almost human. They said it wanted to fly, that it forgave their mistakes. Behind every one of those stories lay the invisible math of Shenstone's curves. The way lift was spread evenly across the span. The way drag fell away like silk in the air. In a letter to a friend, Shenstone wrote, "The beauty of flight is not brute force, but balance, a harmony between the wind's will and the engineer's intent. The Spitfire is not a weapon of war, but a symphony of air." By the war's end in 1945, nearly 22,000 Spitfires had been built in over 20 variants. They flew in every theater, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen skies of Norway. And through every evolution, the clipped-wing low-altitude models, the reconnaissance variants, even the carrier-based Seafires, the essence of Shenstone's design remained. The elliptical wing endured. Years later, when the last operational Spitfires were retired, a handful were preserved for air shows and remembrance flights. On clear summer days, they still took to the sky. Engines purring, wings glinting in the sunlight like polished silver. Crowds would look up in silence, watching those perfect arcs carve the air. At one such show, Shenstone stood among them. Older now, his hair silver, his eyes hidden behind thick spectacles. As the Spitfire roared overhead, rolling into a graceful barrel turn, he smiled faintly. A man beside him said, "Beautiful, isn't she? Hard to believe they built her with nothing but pencils and paper back then." Shenstone simply nodded. "It wasn't the paper that mattered," he replied softly. "It was the pencil." He remembered the rain that night in 1935. The sound of graphite against parchment, the quiet conviction that he could draw the wind. And in that moment, as the Spitfire traced its perfect ellipse across the blue, Beverly Shenstone knew his creation had outlived war and become art.